Welcome to the Explainer. You know as well as I do, if you design assessments, your results are really only as good as the tools you use to measure them. So today, we're opening up the Test Design Toolkit. We're going to look strictly at the actual items we use to measure learning, exploring their detailed mechanics so you know exactly when and how to deploy them.
We'll be moving across a 5-part taxonomy spectrum today. We're covering selected response, restricted constructed response, extended constructed response, performance and task-based, and finally, alternative assessments. As we go, you'll notice a clear shift from highly constrained objective test items all the way to open-ended real-world tasks.
All right, let's dive into Section 1, Selected Response Techniques. These are the standardized stalwarts, absolutely the most common tools you'll see in large-scale testing.
So what exactly makes a selected response item tick? Well, it's pretty simple. The test taker never actually produces original language. They just pick from a menu of pre-written options. Basically, you're trading the ability to measure actual language production for perfect objectivity. Literally, a machine can score these items flawlessly in milliseconds.
This brings us to the absolute king of the category, the multiple choice item, or MCI. You've got the stem, which is the question, followed by the correct key, and then the incorrect distractors. But here's where the real art of item design comes in. Great distractors aren't just random wrong answers. They're carefully engineered traps designed to test partial knowledge. If a distractor is poorly written, test-wise students can just guess the answer through elimination rather than relying on actual knowledge.
MCIs are incredibly practical. For sure, you get high marking reliability, and you can pack in dozens of questions to cover a massive amount of material very quickly. But the trade-off is steep. They only test recognition, not production. I mean, a student might correctly identify a perfectly structured sentence, but be totally unable to write one themselves. Plus, with 4 options, every student walks into the room with a 25% guessing advantage right off the bat. And most concerningly, in high-stakes environments, MCIs can cause teaching to just narrow down to test prep drilling, rather than authentic, deep learning.
Beyond MCIs, we do have a few other tools. True-false items are lightning fast to administer, but they carry a massive flaw, a 50% guessing probability. You might as well just flip a coin. Then you have ordering tasks, where students arrange words or sentences into a sequence. Great for testing structure, but if a student misplaces just one single word, it creates a cascade of errors that totally destroys the rest of their sequence. Finally, error identification asks students to find the grammatical mistake in a sentence. The issue here, it measures formal analysis rather than the ability to actually communicate.
This specific vulnerability is perfectly captured in matching items. You know when students draw lines between prompts and responses from 2 lists? Well, as Arthur Hughes points out, an error in one pair automatically eliminates the right choice for the next pair. One tiny mistake unfairly distorts the rest of their profile, which completely violates the basic assumption of independent measurement.
Let's keep moving across the spectrum to Section 2, Restricted Constructed Response Techniques. We are officially stepping into the middle ground now.
In this category, we're finally asking test takers to produce language, but we're keeping the guardrails up. The boundaries are very tight. These items try to capture the best of both worlds, really. They force students to generate actual answers, bringing in that productive element, while keeping the scoring relatively constrained and objective.
A classic example here is the close procedure. A text is presented, but every nth word, say every 5th word, is mathematically deleted. The test taker has to restore the missing words. Theoretically, to fill that gap, you have to process local syntax and global meaning simultaneously. But critics like Alderson point out a major flaw. Mechanical deletion might just erase a highly predictable, simple word like the. And if your scoring rubric only accepts the exact original word, you end up penalizing a brilliant student who provides a perfectly valid, maybe even better, synonym.
A sense transformation task is another fascinating way to isolate specific knowledge. You give the student a source sentence and a target word, and they have to rewrite the sentence using that exact word without changing the original meaning at all. It's a brilliant constraint for forcing a student to productively use a specific grammar structure, like the passive voice or conditionals. But let's be honest, how often do you actually do this in real-world conversation?
Looking at other restricted tools, we see similar trade-offs everywhere. Gap fills face that exact same ambiguity of accepting exact words versus acceptable variations. Dictation tasks, where you transcribe a spoken text, force the integration of listening and writing, but they often, unfortunately, conflate listening comprehension with spelling ability. And information transfer tasks? Those require students to extract data from a dense text and map it onto a blank form or diagram.
It feels highly authentic, but because the answers are usually just single words, it doesn't actually show us if they can string a full sentence together.
That brings us to Section 3, Extended Constructed Response. We're leaving single words and sentences in the rearview mirror and entering the realm of sustained communication.
If a test designer truly wants to measure writing or speaking ability, there is simply no substitute for this category. These items, think essays, reports, extended oral monologues, they require test takers to plan, organize, and express their ideas completely independently. They offer the absolute highest level of direct evidence for language production.
But here is the ultimate tension in test design. The ideal is that extended essays provide incredible ecological validity. Students get to show off their full range of vocabulary, rhetorical choices, and their own individual voice. The reality, though, grading them is an absolute nightmare of time, cost, and subjectivity. Without rigorous rubrics and highly trained graders, two different teachers might give the exact same essay vastly different scores based entirely on what they personally value. And this introduces a major vulnerability in scoring essays, the halo effect. If a rater looks at an essay and their very first impression is that the handwriting or formatting looks super polished, that positive halo unconsciously makes them rate the student higher on complex things like argumentation, even if the arguments themselves are actually weak. Human bias is literally the enemy of reliability here.
We see this complexity pop up in other extended items too. Integrated writing tasks ask a student to read a text, listen to a lecture, and then write an essay combining both. It's incredibly authentic to academic life for sure, but it confounds multiple constructs. If a student scores poorly, was it because they can't write or because they just totally missed the listening part? Then you have oral proficiency interviews, where a trained interviewer adapts questions in real time to find the student's limit. It's fantastic for assessing speaking, but it introduces the interlocutor effect, meaning the interviewer's own style, competence, and even mood can actually alter the student's final score.
Now, let's step even further into authenticity with Section 4, Performance and Task-Based Techniques. In this category, demonstrating knowledge about language on a piece of paper is no longer enough. The learner must actually perform a meaningful task. Think simulating a job interview, resolving a customer complaint, or navigating a messy travel scenario. They have to use the language to achieve a real concrete goal. Take information gap tasks as a perfect example of this. Two participants each hold different pieces of information, and they literally have to talk to each other to solve a problem, like reconstructing a route on a map. This creates genuine communicative pressure. But here's the double-edged sword. Because the performance is being co-constructed by two people, how on earth do you score the individual? If one partner completely dominates the conversation, or if one is so weak they drag the other down, assigning a fair individual grade becomes a massive methodological headache. Finally, we reach Section 5, the absolute edge of our taxonomy, alternative assessments.
In this space, the learner isn't just a passive subject sitting for a 2-hour exam on a Tuesday morning. They become an active participant in measuring their own growth over time. The focus shifts to the messy, beautiful process of learning itself, rather than just a one-off final product.
Let's rapidly unpack this alternative toolkit. Portfolios require students to physically compile drafts and reflections over months. It's great for showing multidimensional growth, but it suffers from massive selection bias since students only submit their highlight reel. Self-assessment checklists promote amazing autonomy, but research constantly shows beginners overestimate their skills. Dynamic assessment is really fascinating because the test itself changes. The examiner actually provides hints during the test to measure how responsive a student is to help. And finally, computer adaptive testing uses algorithms to feed you harder or easier questions in real time based on your last click. It's incredibly efficient, but it does require massive, expensive item banks to function properly.
We just keep coming back to this fundamental tension, practicality versus validity. No single test item can do it all. MCIs are wonderfully cheap and reliable, but they strip away real communication. Performance tasks capture the true richness of language, but they completely resist standardized grading. So the next time you open up your toolkit to design an assessment, you have to ask yourself, which trade-off are you willing to make, and what exactly are you willing to sacrifice to measure true learning?